I've seen this guy in many other places, and there's this whole long introduction. He's the Renaissance man, he's Batman, he's Superman, he flies through the air. All I have here is just like, it's a pleasure to introduce. This guy is a power, and you'll find out. And now it's time, with great pleasure, to introduce the speaker for today's message, which is Change Your Story to Change Your Life. It's my pleasure to introduce the one, the only, Reverend Dr. Raymont Anderson. Renaissance and Baroque.
I'm not broke. Extremely wealthy. So how is everyone today? Great. So you didn't know you were coming here for a stand-up comedy show today, did you? You had no idea.
I knew.
Yeah, of course you knew. You had an agenda. So the idea of changing our stories, it's like it's not anything new. I'm sure if you've been involved in this teaching or this philosophy for any amount of time, at some point the idea of that has come up. But how often do we really sit down to delve into what exactly it means to change our stories? Especially because a lot of our stories we believe we cannot change. And there are certain aspects of them that we can't. For example, that which God is chose to incarnate itself, this skin color. That's not changing, right? So that element of my story is mine to work with. But there are a lot of other elements within my story that can be tweaked and changed. There are a lot of elements in our stories that we get to modify and revise on a daily basis. But we don't. We can, but we don't. Now, there's a lot of story-related stuff at the very foundation of the country. This thing called the United States of America. And because we are participating in, that story, part of that story becomes our story as Americans. Because it's the Lutherville, Baltimore area, part of that story becomes our story. Because it's East Coast, part of that story becomes our story. And we take it for granted. We go about our business, we do whatever we do on a regular daily default setting, rather than standing in our innate divine power to make changes. How often have we ever thought about what kind of story are we living? Meaning, if I ask you, name some of the genres of film and television. Like, what is a genre of film or genre of television?
Science fiction.
Science fiction.
Romance, drama.
Drama, romance.
Film noir.
Film noir.
Horror.
Romantic comedy. What did you say, Fern?
Horror.
Horror.
Action.
Action. So all of these are genres of how storytellers tell stories. Which one of those genres do we fall into? And I mean that seriously. If someone were reading a book called The Life and Times of Raymont Anderson, would they read it as a romantic comedy? Nope. Would they read it as science fiction? Some of the chapters. Horror? Some of the chapters. Mystery? Some of the chapters. Like, what, for real, if we really sat down and looked at our lives, what is the story? What is the meat of what our lives are presenting to the world? Because if we just go about regular, everyday programming and we change nothing in our own lives, then nothing in the world ultimately changes. Because each of us plays a part in the totality of. So we talk about this thing called mass consciousness. We play a part in that. And if we're not shifting our consciousness, then mass consciousness goes on about regular default autopilot as it's been doing for millennia of So we play a part in how consciousness shifts. But if we're not focusing on how consciousness within our own lives, within our own 24-hour time cycle of a day, we're not really participating in that, then how do we ever change anything? And then, how often do we question the programming that we've been given? For example, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet Viktor Frankl said it is the very pursuit of happiness that thwarts happiness.
But the founding fathers stated,
I have a right to pursue it. And yet, by pursuing it, you are increasing the likelihood of never attaining it. And the funny thing is, it's not even something to attain. Happiness is your innate, divine birthright. If I woke up one morning and said, Safi, I'm really distraught today. And Safi says, you want to talk about it like a here, here you go. Reverend Ray, why are you distraught today? And I say, I'm distraught because I'm looking for something and I cannot find it. And she says, what is it that you're searching for? And I say, I'm looking for my blackness. What the hell are you talking about? I seem to have misplaced that which makes me African American. Maybe you want to look in the mirror. Like, I don't understand what you mean you misplaced it. I can't find it. I'm looking for it. I'm pursuing it. Right? It doesn't make sense. There are certain things about us that are who we are. Happiness is one of those. It's as tangible, it is as part of us as race, as ethnicity. And while those are labels, yes, but there's still that element of it is part of how we show up in the world. Happiness is part of how we can show up in the world when we choose to enact it. We've heard this many times that back in 1413, the year 1413, let's climb in Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine and travel to that time period. Anybody in here even know who that is? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's coming.
Come, Sherman, come.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. So we go back. Electricity. But electricity, the capability for electricity existed in 1201, in 300 BC. The capability to create everything that we have existed then. The only reason it wasn't there is because the capability of the consciousness of the belief system of the people at the time did not know. So here we are today with great expanded levels of consciousness, technology, and things that are created like every day, more and more. Billions of bits of information uploaded to the web, etc. And yet we don't sit down within ourselves to really ground in what does it mean to live this life that's called Raymont, but to live this life that is called God showing up as Raymont. And if that's the case, if that's the ultimate story that's being told, then how am I participating in the writing of it? How am I participating in the crafting of it and the creating of it? Because we do get to change. We do get to change not only our understanding of the story, but we get to change the story itself. How many of us have ever watched a movie more than one time, and with each time that you watch it, some new insight was yielded to you? I've watched The Matrix well into the 4-digit numbers by now, at least. At least. And if you haven't watched The Matrix, that's homework assignment. But every time I watch it, something new that I didn't realize or didn't at that time, like, wait a minute, the way Morpheus said what he said gave me a different, something else popped in my mind. Every time we revisit our stories, we have an opportunity to change an insight, to gain an insight, to change an awareness or gain an awareness so that we're acting from a different point of view. Yes, there have been times that I simply referred to myself as an abused child. Yeah, that's what we're taught to do. Claim the label, walk with pride. I am a survivor. I have survived the abuses of X, Y, and Z. And there's a level of consciousness where that is extremely valuable. But at what point do we no longer simply survive, but we thrive? At what point do we say, yes, I at one time was victim to this addiction, but no longer. So I don't want to claim any of that any longer. So at one time I experienced abuse. And yet now, what I have done with all of that. How am I shaping my life today with all of that? What do I get to do moving forward with all of that? Last Sunday we talked about a gentleman who was in, how many were here last week? Okay, almost all of you, so the quiz is. Do you remember me mentioning a gentleman who was in prison? Do we remember how long he was in prison? 30 years. Do we remember what part of the prison he was in for the majority of that time? Solitary. Solitary confinement for nearly 30 years for a crime he did not commit. And yet came out with compassion and kindness, forgiveness. If anyone has a right to say they were victimized by the system, they are a victim of circumstance, I would venture to say this gentleman could claim that. But he doesn't. Well, why not? If you have a right to claim the label, dude, make a banner, make a flag, and run through the streets waving it. You have the but he didn't want to because he understood that that was not the most empowering thing to do. It is not the most empowering place to move forward. And here we are, at the same crossroad opportunity of what do we choose to do? How do we choose to live? Are you in a state of complete acceptance, coherence, and resonance with your life as it is now? Made peace with all of the ghosts of Christmas past and Christmases yet to be. When we get to the core of the stories we tell about anything, we find that the stories we tell ourselves and tell others about ourselves are in fact the magic spells that we are using to create our world. Are we ready to change the stories and risk becoming free and powerful? And we say yes. You know, sometimes we say, and you know, people say, you got the magic genie bottle, and people say, be careful what you wish for, because you'll get it. Now, normally people say, well, you just might get it. I'm glad you are elevated in consciousness enough to know that once you've made the wish, you are going to get it. Being free, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And I'm not talking just, you know, freedom the way we as Americans typically understand freedom. I'm talking about consciousness. The power that comes with knowing who and what we are. To whom much is given, much is required. Or as Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Do we realize how powerful we are? We have learned as a species how to take one of the most smallest parts of energy, the atom, split it, and destroy things. As a species, we learn how to take an atom, split it, harness the energy to destroy life on planet Earth. And the thing we understand in this philosophy is, if it shows up in one form, then the counter of it exists. We also then must, as a species, be able to harness that same kind of energy to bring life, to build life, to nurture life. But we have to choose. We have to be willing to choose differently. Ernest Holmes says, your own choice has decided you. to which I could continue, and your choices continue to make you. Your own choice has decided you. So what are you choosing today then? What are you choosing from the moment you wake up? Do I say, I choose freedom? I choose love. I choose peace. You know, there's this thing called Instagram. Don't know if you've ever heard of it. There's this thing called Instagram. And a certain politician posted on, a certain politician who's running for president, who has never been president, post on his Instagram page a certain comment about the current administration. And I typed a question saying, blah, 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 blah. And as a result of my question, 157 other additional comments were made by people who support the current administration and those who don't. But I say all that to say that at one point, a certain person made a comment, and intuition just said, who is this person? I click their page, and I go to their page, and of the 97, if I can remember correctly, 97 photos, 90 of them were pictures of this gentleman with a gun. Whether it was a rifle, long range, whether it was a pistol that he put together, whether it was him teaching his son how to shoot, whether it was him teaching his younger brother how to shoot, all 90 out of 97. And you know what welled in me at that moment? Starts with an F. Fear. I'm public. You go to my page, you can find my website, you can find where I'm speaking on any given Sunday. And my mind immediately jumped to, don't piss him off because he's got a gun. In that moment, I chose to craft a story based upon my imagination and where my imagination could lead me. We do that on a regular. So what did I do? Because at first, my thing was, go back and delete your comments and close your page so he can't. And then I regained and came back to myself and reminded myself, I create the story of my life with every thought I think and every word I speak. Today, I choose to be more mindful, vigilant, and purposeful of the power that I have access to. I understand there is a power for good in the universe, and I am using it. That was the affirmation that I crafted. So each year, CSL gets ministers to do the outlines for our movement, and this year I was selected to do 2 weeks. This Sunday is the week that was my week. So that was the affirmation that I sent out to the ministers listserv, to every minister in our movement. So there are other people in our movement right now talking about this topic that I gave our movement to talk about. There are others right now affirming that same affirmation with us, knowing that we are creating, we are crafting, we are the artists who are painting and drawing and sculpting and singing our lives into existence. We get to choose if we're living in a horror story or not. Might this gentleman find me? Yeah, maybe. Might he shoot me? Yeah, maybe. But am I going to live my life based upon that fear of? No. Why would I? Because anybody could at any moment. When I go to Mexico for the ministers gathering for the CSL conference next month, the plane may not stay in the air while I'm in it. Is that a possibility? Yes. We know these things happen. Somebody filmed themselves on the plane and something flew into the engine and they filmed it like, so I'm letting my parents know I'm like that because something's in the engine. These things happen. And yet we still get on planes. We still drive our cars. We still go about our regularly scheduled programming as living beings. Because we get to choose if we are going to be enslaved by or enslaved to fear. There was an amazing song that I recently heard where it said something about there's the devil, and then there's the God self, and you get to choose which one you feed. You get to choose. I don't know if you're familiar with the song, but it's a great song. But we get to choose. And see, what we know in our metaphysical teaching relating to the devil is Satan, the father of lies, the lies that we tell ourselves. Do we feed the lies that we are telling ourselves? Every time we play small, we're feeding the lie. Every time we remind ourselves how weak or incapable we are, we're feeding the lies. Feeding that part of our consciousness that is, that paradigm that is, that belief system that is built on and based on the lies that someone, somewhere instilled in us. So we have the opportunity to change right here and right now. There's a documentary by the name of The Last Laugh. Anybody seen it or heard of it? So, The Last Laugh, and not the Chevy Chase one, because it's a documentary, that's a movie. It's a documentary where they're talking to various comedians like Mel Brooks, and a whole bunch of other folks whose names are just escaping me right now. And what they're talking about is, are some things not joke-worthy? The main one they're referring to is the Holocaust. So they spoke to a lot of Holocaust survivors, comedians who are Jewish, and they asked of themselves, is this something I can joke about? Or is it too taboo? Are there some things that are too taboo? And see, the reason I'm mentioning this, not even to delve into is that or is that, is it ain't. That ain't the point. The point is, by simply asking the questions, we're expanding our consciousness. By simply beginning to ask, what does my life look like if I acknowledge how powerful I am? Just starting to ask the questions changes the energy, the flow of where things are going. There's a Chinese adage that says, many people ask questions to which they already know the answers. So just in the asking, we are saying there must be an answer, or the question would never arrive. Just in the asking, the implication is that there must be a solution, there must be an answer, or the question would never or could never be asked. So just by asking, can racism end? The answer has to be yes, because we're asking the question. Can sexism? Just by asking the question. Can illness and disease? Just by asking the question. How many physicians found ways to do things that other physicians were like, that's not possible? But simply because they were saying, well, but what if? And them asking what if made it possible for babies to have surgery when people before said, but their arteries and veins are too small. Blood to be stored. Hearts to be replaced. Infection to be reduced. Just thinking back, not so long ago, the number of people who were dying from infectious diseases because we as a species didn't understand what germs were. So people were dying from very simple things simply because of germs and infection, because we were throwing trash and waste out into our regularly everyday, just walking down the road and, okay, I'm not sure what that one was, but... And I had a cut on my foot, so now whatever that is, it's in there. And then someone says, well, wait a minute. What's causing this? Boom, the question was asked. So what questions can we ask ourselves that will help change the direction of our stories? That will change the power that we choose to step into? You know, when we do visioning processes in this teaching, one of the questions we ask is, what does Spirit as me want to be in expression? How does that which God is, how does that which the universe is, want to show up as me? to express in me, through me, and as me. Just by asking the question. Just by asking the question, can I be healthier? Can I be more confident? Can I feel more unapologetic in who and what I am? Can I forgive? What would forgiveness look like if I could forgive? Just by asking the questions. J.K. Rowling said, what would a little boy with a scar on his forehead, what would he be afraid of? What would he need to become in order to restore balance? What would Yoda teach a young Jedi who's already too old to be a Jedi? But what would Yoda teach him in order to be the last Jedi? What would someone whose mother is an Earthling, whose father is a Vulcan, who has a great disdain for human emotions, how would that individual reconcile being a Vulcan and a human, being emotionless and full of emotion in the same body? Each of these writers asked the questions and wrote the stories that became part of our popular culture. Are we willing to ask the questions? Are we willing to step forward into a completely different state of awareness in order to change our stories? Because if not, then it's business as usual. So the book that I mentioned last week, The Sun Does Shine, one of the things the authors stated in the book, and this is the gentleman who was imprisoned. I was born with the same gift from God that we are all born with. The impulse to reach out and lessen the suffering of another human being. It was a gift, and we each had a choice whether to use this gift or not. Everything, I realized, is a choice. And spending your days waiting to die is no way to live. No baby is born a murderer. No toddler dreams of being on death row someday. Every killer on death row was taught to be a killer by parents, or by a system, or by the brutality of another brutalized person. But no one was born a killer. No one of us was born a victim of any shape or form. We were born in and of the image and likeness of love, joy, happiness, power, prosperity. We're born in the image and likeness of that. Because what we say is, and you've heard me mention it many, many times, and I'm going to keep on mentioning it until I feel like it's actually sunk in and is now growing into this mighty oak. God in me, as me, is me. Ernest Holmes, Healing Anatomy of Prayer. God in me, as me, is me. That is what we were born as. That is what we are right now. That is what we will continue to be, because what we understand in this philosophy is there is no such thing as death. But that which life is infinite, eternal, and ever-expanding consciousness. We believe in the individual soul, forever and ever expanding. How do we lay claim to that birthright? How do we reconcile the questions we will not even ask ourselves? Because, I don't want to ask, because what if I don't get an answer? It's almost like dating. You want to go up to that cute person, but you're like, I'm going to be turned down, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm just standing here and twiddle my thumbs. Or do this thing that Renuka does. Called biding my time. When do we just go ahead and risk and say, if I ask 100 people, you want to dance? 100 people may say no. If I ask 200, 20 of them may say yes. One may say yes. And that one may be just enough. Are we willing to risk? Big word. Risk being free. Risk being powerful. Risk being that which we are as the divine, showing up in us, through us, and as us. Because that's the true story of our being. God, living, moving, and having its beingness as love and joy and light and health and well-being and laughter. Let's pray. Grounded in this moment, simply breathing, simply surrendering to the breath. And what I know as we surrender to this breath is that the infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present beingness of the thing itself, the one mind, that which we call God, Source, Spirit, the I am, love, that which it is, must be what I am, since it is all there is. And it being all there is, and therefore it being what I am, then what I know is that every quality, trait, and attribute that is God's must also be mine. So if I say God is loving, God is love itself, I am that. I am. God is joy in expression, I am that. I am. God is infinite health and well-being in demonstration, I am that. I am. God is that which is laughter bubbling up and flowing. I am that too. Yes, yes, yes. And so much more. I am that. And what is true for me must be true for everyone in this room as well, because God is all there is. Everyone in this room and everyone in this room knows God. Everyone in this room, everyone in this room knows, and everyone who you see and hear, God. It's all God. And it being God, it must be good. And so in this moment, I speak this word knowing that as consciousness shifts and changes in this human expression of life, that those things that are not demonstrating as life affirming, as joy affirming, must fade away. That health must be restored, so that where we see racism, that which God is, sees only oneness, harmony, and peace. And so in this moment, in this breath, I stand firm in the awareness that that which God is addressing that thing called racism, that thing called sexism, that thing called Islamophobia, homophobia. That which God is in expression as me, as that which is the we of this species and this planet, God moving its hands as us. God speaking its words through these mouths. Serving this beloved community. All of it is God in action. And if it is God in action, then that which needs, that which calls for, that which beckons for, that which desires health, wholeness, and healing is already being addressed. And so I continue to pray. I continue to treat and move my feet. I continue to do that which is mine to do to change not only my story, but that the collective story of the whole. The collective story of the one, that more and more and more and more of us know our divinity, know our truth, and live, move, and have our beingness from that place of awareness. That we are only feeding the God self. We are only feeding the love self. We are only feeding the joy self. We are only feeding that which is life affirming, God affirming, the I am affirming. And knowing that that is what we are feeding, that is what we are nurturing, that is what we are nourishing, then that is what is strengthening, that is what is building. And knowing that that is the truth of our being, I surrender this into the law. The law that eternally says yes. It said yes before any of us woke up this morning. It said yes during the drive to this center. It said yes when we sat down. It said yes from Doug's first joke. It said yes from Southeast First Song. It said yes from Frank's invocation. It is saying yes right now through this prayer. It will continue to say yes to each and every one of us, because that which God is can never, is never, will never be separated from that which we are. Because all that we are, God is. Surrendered because it's done. Together we declare, we affirm, and we demand that the universe recognize this truth by saying, and so it is. Y'all antsy. Y'all anxious.